Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rewatch Project with Hannah and Mike. I am Mike, and with me, as always, is Hannah. How are you this evening, darling?
It's been a week of two halves, so I'm looking forward to some podcasting. It's been my birthday this week, so that was something lovely.
It was nice. Went to the beach last night.
Yep. And today I got driven up the arse by an old lady in a car. So, our car's been written off and I've got all that to deal with now. So
Nobody hurt.
2 thumbs up Friday.
Yes.
Yes, nobody hurt. Just a complete pain in the bum getting it all sorted. So anyway,
it's the weekend.
Podcast.
It's the weekend. We're going to podcast.
The weekend is beautiful sunshine, and we're healthy and happy and two nearly asleep kids. So.
Yes. We are not two nearly asleep kids.
No, we have two nearly
We are two nearly
kids.
asleep adults.
Yeah.
So
the 0% beer is well earned.
Yes, it
today.
is. It is. So we're going to imbibe these pseudo-adult beverages, and we are... Well, what are we going to watch tonight, Hannah?
Well, I thought we might watch a little B5.
Sounds good.
Babylon 5. Tonight's episode is called Born to the Purple.
Episode 3 of season 1, I believe.
Yep. Plot says Londo falls for a beautiful slave whose owner wants to steal sensitive information. Garibaldi discovers that someone is using a restricted communications channel. It is directed by Bruce Seth. Say that 3 times fast.
Hey, just say it once regular. I think would be challenging enough.
And it's written by Larry DiTillio.
So this is interesting because this is the first episode of the show. God, you got me doing it now. Episode of the show. Steve is sexy. This is the first episode of the show not to be written by J. Michael Straczynski. So,
indeed.
Could that mean that this is a legitimate standalone episode of the show? Who knows? Well, I know actually, but I'm not going to say.
Me too, but I'm not going to say it.
Yeah. I mean, Babylon 5 is one of the things that it's noted for is the Herculean workload of J. Michael Straczynski. The fact that he wrote nearly every episode of the show. I mean, that was never the intention. I've said before about how this is very much a stealth serial. You know, he sold this show to Warner Brothers on the understanding that it was going to be like, Star Trek or the X-Files or any of those shows where it's standalones, a little bit of accumulated continuity, and the occasional two-parter. But he obviously had very different plans and was seeding a lot of storylines. But obviously he needed to come in and look like he was running a regular TV show with a staff of writers where you'd have the showrunner, like Chris Carter or somebody like that, who would, or, Joss Whedon, who would, write the key episodes. And it's not unusual for a show to have the creator write a lot of episodes at the beginning because you're trying to establish the show and the rules and the Bible of the show. But, and here we are seeing another writer come in. But looking back at the show now, there's a remarkably low number of episodes not written by JMS, and the vast majority of episodes that aren't written by JMS are in the early part of the show when he was still trying to maintain this ruse that this was a standard early 90s formatted show like Sequest or Sliders or My Beloved Early Edition.
A space opera.
Yeah, exactly. Because nobody wanted a space opera in 1993 before TiVo and DVD and streaming, It just didn't make sense. And one of the big sources of revenue for TV studios then networks was reselling these shows into syndication. And syndication want to be able to just throw them on in any order and not worry about continuity. So there was a business reason for that. So having said all of that, it's going to be really interesting to watch this episode and see somebody else's, another writer's perspective on Babylon 5 because we haven't seen that so far.
Yeah, 100%.
So, have we got any feedback, by the way?
Yes, we do.
Okay, well, before we get to that, just a quick reminder on how you can also, you, the gentle listener-viewer, can send us feedback. You can email us at rewatchprojectpodcast@gmail.com, or alternatively, you can leave comments here on the YouTube channel. I would also suggest that you check out our friends' shows, namely Chinstroker vs. Punter, his film, her movie, The Good, the Bad and the Odd, Talk Without Rhythm podcast, Entertainment Landfill, and Film Bastards. We also very much appreciate reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And I would say that if you listen to this show as a podcast, do go and check out the YouTube channel because there's some other stuff over there as well. Speaking of which, we do appreciate PayPal donations to help with the upkeep of the show. But as we always say, please do not do so if contributing would cause you any financial hardship, because we certainly do not want that. So yes, feedback, Hannah, what we got?
So we've got one email and some YouTube comments. So I'm going to read the YouTube comments first.
3 Men and a Baby or 4 Weddings and a Funeral, isn't it?
Yeah. For listeners of our previous 2 episodes, you'll know that I have a section now called Chaz Chats.
Yeah.
But
I think we should probably explain why you called it Chaz Chats.
So we have a YouTube feedbacker whose YouTube handle is CPMF2112. So I decided to christen them Chaz and their segment Chaz Chats because they've come up with some excellent things about the episodes so far. I am going to have to rename that because we find out Chaz's real name.
Oh, place your bets.
Yeah, place your bets. I'm going to read Chaz's feedback first and then reveal the new name. Okay.
It's a name reveal. It's a name reveal video.
Okay, they say, the thing that always amazed me about B5 is that it looks so good on a third or less of the typical Star Trek budget.
And I'd say probably less than a third.
Yeah. They go on to say, fortunately, we were both right since you said broadcast and I said filmed.
Obviously in regards to the ratio, isn't it?
Yeah, the widescreen versus 4:3. They say, I apologise for not introducing myself. I am Mike.
Wow, hey, me too. Greetings, namesake.
Shall we call it Mike's Musings?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah?
Yeah. And if we want to clarify, I would say we've got I'm Classic Mike.
Or Prime Mike.
Prime Mike, yeah. I think that could do. So we've got
Classic Mike
and Mike.
And Mike with added sugar.
Yeah, there we go.
I don't know.
New Mike.
Also, Mark from The Good, the Bad and the Odd really enjoyed our naming his sections Babbling 5.
Yes.
Which I thought was good.
That happened very organically.
It did. We also have an email from a new feedbacker.
Oh, okay.
So here we go. Hello, Hannah and Mike. I have been really enjoying your Babylon 5 show so far. Love the way you approach discussing the show. Great points about the episodes always having a couple of extra scenes after when you expect it to end. That's definitely a trained by Star Trek thing. Your podcast not only brings back fond memories, but also offers new perspectives and a great understanding of the series. It's clear that you share the same passion for the show. Thank you for creating such an engaging and thoughtful podcast. Just wanted to let you know that I am watching and that I am looking forward to interacting with you more as we move forward. Armand from Boston.
Armand, that's a good name. Boston, the land of cheers.
Absolutely.
And terrible Ben Affleck accents.
And apples.
Yes, apples.
How you like them apples?
Yeah, I like apples.
I like apples. Welcome and thank you so much for feedbacking.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
Yeah, there's some good points in there. And I mean, one thing I'd be curious to hear from listeners who are rewatching Babylon 5 as well is just your experiences of watching the show for the first time. Because he mentions talking about, bringing back memories of rewatching the show. And for me, a big part of my attachment to Babylon 5 is, I guess, nostalgia for the time when I watched it and the kind of where fandom was, because we were into the internet age, but it was early in the internet age to the point where most people probably still access the internet at like internet cafes and libraries, or in my case, I hadn't lived with my parents for years. My parents had the internet, but it wasn't something that, impoverished 20-somethings in skanky rental houses living with their friends could afford. It was right. I associate Babylon 5 as being existing at a really transitional time in pop culture. When we were starting to see the internet age come in, but we were still very much in that Star Trek era of fandom where it was still a very marginalized thing. You know?
Well, to be honest, I'd not heard of it until you introduced me to it. And
was it even on television in New Zealand?
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say no because it could very much be.
But it certainly didn't have any profile, though, did it?
No.
I mean, because you were aware of other sci-fi shows that were even ones that you didn't watch.
I watched Star Trek. I watched Sliders. I even watched your beloved Early Edition. So
you should.
You know, I wasn't an avid sci-fi viewer at the time, but I was also aware of sci-fi programs that were out there. So.
I mean, if you think about a lot of the genre TV that was on at the time, as this discount Star Trek, it was still a very unsophisticated time. I mean, the biggest genre show on TV, probably at the time Babylon 5 started, was like Lois and Clark.
Oh yeah,
I
watched that.
And that was what genre TV was. You know, tea time, kind of watch it whilst eating your tea.
Yeah.
You know, very kind of considered, quite disposable. And you know, so I do love hearing that stuff. Like I associate Babylon 5 very much with that experience of watching with your friends, getting VHS tapes posted from fellow geeks in America, the conventions, you know, going to the conventions, and also, you know, just the other stuff that was on TV at the time, you know, like The Simpsons was peaking in popularity and The X-Files and all of those. So it was a bit of a golden age.
I think also particularly for B5, one of the reasons it would be good to get that feedback of a first-time view versus a rewatch view from fans of the show is because it is such a different experience rewatching it once you know all of the bits and pieces that you don't know the first time you watch it.
Yeah, it is completely different, isn't it?
It like you do watch it through a completely different lens.
But also you just notice stuff because you're freed up a little bit of hard drive space because you're not trying to just process the story and understand the universe.
And you're not getting used to, what was that character's name again?
Yeah.
And who are they?
Well, you can kind of...
Their...
That's a really good point. I mean, and you can just sort of drink it in and you can kind of enjoy the scenery a little bit more, you know? So
and I think you're more aware of like the architecture of the different species ships and surroundings. So like when they do like I can't remember if it was in the pilot or the first episode where Jakar does he ends up being responsible for selling arms and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bit of fakery in terms of the ship that they're on and things. So once you know kind of what a Vorlon ship looks like and, you know, Centauri stuff.
The storyline takes on an added sort of depth.
Well, you can sort of catch if someone's actually telling the truth or not.
Because you know.
Yeah.
Because
you can just see.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like you've been watching the show long enough to know the difference between a Ferrari and a DeLorean, you know? Okay, well, shall we get into it? Shall we watch
Let's do it.
Born to the Purple? And I think the other thing as well is it's worth mentioning in regards to what you were saying a moment ago about rewatching, particularly in regards to this, which I think is as far as the story arc goes, if I remember correctly, a fairly insubstantial episode. That's not to say it's bad, but it's just it's a kind of this week on Babylon 5.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that's interesting about that in regards to rewatching things is I find those episodes much more enjoyable on rewatch because you're not watching it not knowing what the quality arc of the show is.
Yeah.
So if you get an episode that's a bit naff or a bit insubstantial, you can just enjoy it for what it is, as opposed to thinking, oh, has the show lost its way?
Yeah.
Or, you know, or has it gone crap? Because you know it hasn't.
Is this going to be a slog to watch?
You just know that this is one episode out of 25 that season. And this is one of those episodes where they're like, hey, let's just have a caper. Let's just spend some time with the characters and take them out for a test drive and have some fun. And we'll get back to the big stuff. I mean, that's one of the reasons why when people say, oh, if Babylon 5 was made now, they could do it just 10 episode seasons and it could be all story arc and it'd all be great. And I'm like, you are losing something by doing that, though. You are losing the fact that, when characters make decisions or have reversals or have consequences or powerful things happen to them, it's like what you said before, Hannah, about how if you haven't had the fun episode of Riker in his blue pajamas playing his trombone, it doesn't mean as much when he's fighting a Borg and the stake of the universe is at stake.
Yeah.
So I think that the hangout factor that you get from episodes like that are really important.
I think character episodes, like say Riker in his blue pajamas, Data having sex with Tasha Yar, all of those seemingly really insignificant bits and pieces that happen just flesh out a character enough that when you need to care about them, you do.
It's funny, that example that you gave of Data and Tasha Yar is actually a really good one, because that was a very silly episode, very throwaway, and that was a cheap gag. Yeah. But about six seasons later, there's an episode where it looks like Data's going to have to leave the Enterprise and he's packing up his stuff.
Yeah.
And you see he's got a little hollow statue of Tasha. And it's a blink and you miss it moment. But that tells you something about his character, that stayed with him.
It's referenced many times.
And it meant something.
Yep.
But that grew out of a moment of silliness in the show. But that narrative opportunity would not have presented itself if they hadn't have done that.
Yeah.
So absolutely. I think sometimes it's like, but anyway, we're going to hit pause. We're going to watch Born to the Purple, and then we will return for an initially non-spoiler conversation about our immediate thoughts of watching that. And then we will say goodbye to those of you who are watching Babylon 5 for the first time, and then we'll do a short spoiler section, potentially at the end. Maybe it'll be very short this week, because obviously this is not a JMS episode, although it's probably worth mentioning that JMS was the showrunner, so I'm pretty sure that every script that was written on the show, he probably has his hands in to some degree.
Oh, yeah.
But he didn't sit down and type this thing out. So we'll see what effect.
Let's see what old Lozzolari.
Or Lozzolari. Actually, it's worth mentioning briefly, Larry DiTillio, he was somebody who had worked with JMS before, because Straczynski had mainly worked on children's shows. His main two substantial writing gigs before Babylon 5 were He-Man, the animated series, and the Ghostbusters animated series. They were and they were both, I believe, I might be wrong here, but I think that the showrunner for both of those shows was Larry DiTillio. Right. So they've got history there. I know certainly that they've worked together as well. He also did a couple of sort of kids sci-fi shows as well. So this was very much his first full foray into TV. So, okay, we're going to hit pause. We're going to come back after we've watched this and tell you what we thought. So, and we are back. So we've just finished watching the third episode of Season 1 of Babylon 5, Born to the Purple. Hannah, before we get into any kind of breakdown on this, initial thoughts?
I really enjoyed it as a standalone, and it very much is a standalone in my eyes. Very much what we were talking about earlier with character development and getting more of a sense of the type of traits that each of the characters have, particularly Garibaldi, Ivanova, and then obviously Londo, Jakar. Some excellent one-liners in this. Yeah,
there's some pretty good dialogue in this episode.
And really sort of helps to round Londo out, to show that sort of loneliness and sadness coming through about what his experience is, how he's seen versus how he feels. I really enjoyed it. And I mean, it would never be one of my top 10 episodes or anything like that. But in terms of a good character reference point, it's probably a great way to start for Londo.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a really solid early episode of a TV show, and it kind of does what those episodes need to do, where basically, I think I phrased it earlier on, is that you're taking the characters and the show and the concept out for a test drive.
Yeah.
and you're seeing what you can do, what type of stories you can tell in this show and the format. And it's a little bit like, we talked about this with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was a show that kind of would reinvent itself every so often, almost kind of reformat itself. Like there'd be a big event, and then that would reset the status quo of the show for a while. And then what the show would do is, for the next few episodes, it would explore, well, what are the kind of stories we can tell in this new format?
Yeah.
And then it would evolve and move the storyline along. And in some ways, Babylon 5's like that. So we've been introduced in the pilot episode and the first couple of episodes to the universe and the races and the concepts and the technology and the environments and the mythology of the story. But what this episode's doing now is like, okay, well, now we've got that. What are the stories we can tell?
Well, I also think, like, the previous episode, Soul Hunter, is very Minbari focused. And
which is a very important part of the big storyline.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But, like, it gives you a good sense of who Delenn is as a character and kind of potentially where some of her motivation comes from, and the characterizations of her race, like what's important culturally, what's important religiously. And then this episode is kind of doing that for the Centauri.
Yeah.
So showing that status and
manipulation and secrets.
Well, things are really important to the Centauri. So how you're perceived by the public.
Class.
Very class driven, very, what's your role? How much power do you have?
But also how much of their identity is connected to the past.
Very much so. It's like, who was your great-grandfather? Where did they fit within the chain of power?
But also, no, what I mean by that, though, is the past in the sense that...
the past of the country.
Yeah, that they are past their prime. And, we talked about how Londo is like one of those guys who sits in a bar and tells people about his past. You almost get the feeling that his entire empire is that, Yeah,
but Londo has that, like, so nuanced thing of, as much as he, like, is wistful about the days before and how it used to be and how great they were and all that kind of thing, he understands that as much as that's the type of person he is and he's not going to change, he knows it's not a healthy or good way to be.
He's got the self-awareness, but also, I mean, he's a contradiction because he's a cynic, but he's also a romantic.
Yeah.
He yearns for what he once was, but not just the power and glory of the empire, but also some kind of lost innocence. It's almost like he wants to be back where he was before he saw too much. You get that feeling from him.
I love that thing he says right at the end about how he's been in love many times and he's been hurt many times and he'll be fine. And you kind of get that as much as he's talking about being in love with women and what have you.
Wine, women and song.
He was in love with his country and he's been desperately hurt by...
He's talking about faith and belief, ultimately.
Yeah. So it's not just his romanticism of relationships, it's his romanticism for his country.
Yeah, and also, I mean, in the previous episodes as well, when we've seen Londo and Jakar particularly, it's been in highly dramatically charged situations. It's been war and conflict and recrimination.
This is a much quieter episode for him.
So what this episode and episodes like this allow us is to see these characters in much less charged situations. And I think that's something, again, that's one of the many gifts of this older style of television storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that if you do only do 10 episodes and it's all killer, no filler, you really only get to spend time with the characters when the shit's hitting the fan. And I think that by getting scenes where, like between Londo and Jakar, where they're toasting each other whilst leching over women, is something that you would never get in an episode where the Narn are keeping his nephew prisoner and forcing him to read confessions on camera.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very different opportunity for character insight.
Well, you're also within this episode, because they have that kind of, they end up using Jakar to help Londo without him realizing it at the end. You have that kind of almost sort of comedy beat of how they're kind of like the Odd Couple, grouchy, grumpy old men.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
They're always fighting.
Well, it's like warring neighbours.
Yeah.
You know, arguing over the fence almost about whose tree's growing over into that, but they kind of thrive on that. You also really get to see what the station's actually for. You know, this idea that the station has like KPIs, and you can see Sinclair stressing about it, like shit, you know, there's a lot of politics going on. There's a lot of this kind of make Earth great again stuff going on. He's like, you know, we really need
mega.
Yeah, mega. It's like, you know, he's like, we really need these negotiations to work so we can prove the value of the work that we're doing here.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not all space battles. It's a lot of what a place like Babylon 5 would be people sat around tables arguing about trade routes.
Yeah.
You know, so we actually get to see what it's for to a certain extent. And the other thing as well is that by being this episode being a much more conventional, for want of a better word, standalone type episode, inevitably it makes it feel quite a lot like Star Trek or something like that, or one of those shows which, and I don't say this critically because of course, you know, I'm the poster child for Star Trek fandom, is it's, if you look at this as a much more traditional example of 90s weekly sci-fi, it actually does that really well.
Yeah.
You know, if this is like Star Trek, this would be a really good episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, and I think that in the same way that, you know, we talked before about how Squeeze, the episode of the X-Files about Tombs, was the X-Files producers showing the network what the show could be and how it could function as a weekly show. This episode kind of fulfills that function really well.
Yeah.
You know,
100%.
And also, I will get into this in the spoiler section. There is actually quite a surprising amount of stuff in this episode that does return later in the show.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't know it, and it wouldn't matter at the time.
No.
And this episode, when it aired, was a standalone, and it might not even have been intentional. There might, I mean, maybe later in the show when JMS was writing stuff, he thought, "Oh yeah, I did that in that episode, so why don't I just bring that back here?" You know, I mean, it might have been a kind of recurring thing by.
You can watch this episode in isolation, whether you've seen it the first time or for the 100th time.
Yeah, it's got that 3-act structure, isn't it?
It really does, and you know, it's going to have payoff at the end of it. And okay, it's not going to absolutely change your world, but it's going to entertain you.
Yeah, you will have experienced a story.
Yeah, and it's very much a short story and a compilation,
as opposed to just 45 minutes of this big storyline.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
But I think that episodes like this, I think they add a lot of flavour to the universe. You know.
Tell me what's your flavour.
I would say licorice. All right. Well, should we look at? I do have a few beats I would like to.
I've got a few little
to highlight.
Nothing amazing.
So we open up with old bold Salma Hayek doing her thing, and it's interesting.
I love the fact that the Centauri men are all about the peacock hair.
Yeah.
And the Centauri women are like, we're going to have the bald with the ponytail. And
it's funny when I saw because what they've done is the actress, it's a good one, but they've obviously put like a skull cap on her.
Yeah.
But it's good. They've painted moles on it, and the HD doesn't expose it, which it does for a lot of those shows.
There's no bald cap line.
Like at one point, because she's got the thing around her head, I thought, oh, they're hiding the seam, and then she takes it off at one point, and I'm like, oh no, that was legitimately just adornment.
Yeah.
Although I think maybe they've done that to throw us off, so when they do use it later, I'll be all confused. But what I think about when I see the skull cap is I always think of Ross's bald girlfriend in Friends.
Oh yeah.
And I just think so. Every time the bald Salma Hayek walks on screen, I just think of Chandler's. There is not one single hair on her head. It sort of jumps into my psyche. It's interesting as well seeing Jakar and Londo toasting each other.
Yeah.
Because it's so funny how so much of this episode is Sinclair trying to get Jakar and Londo to negotiate, yet just chuck a bunch of bold birds on stage and just let nature take its course, and they will come together. So it is interesting to see that the individuals, and this is a theme that Babylon 5 will explore, that in many ways, and I'll be careful here because I don't want to spoil it, in many ways, Babylon 5 is a tragedy. I think one of the literary traditions is, and the central tenet of tragedy is the idea of awful inevitability. That, you've got these two people who, under any other circumstances, would probably be friends. They've actually got a lot in common. They're very similar types of people, but their perspectives and their world and their allegiances and where they were born and what they were born into means they can't be. And that's one of the tragic elements of Babylon 5 is that if you sit these guys down and give them a few drinks, give them the wine, women and song, they naturally bond and are drawn to each other. But then the spell's broken. They get up the next morning and go back to work.
Real life comes
into it. It's a little bit like, when you're on holiday and you're like, oh, look, we should move here. We should live here. And you buy the sangria and you take it home and you're like, but then you get home and the sangria just doesn't taste. You're like, actually, this isn't that nice. When you're drinking it in Birmingham, it's so I think there is an element of that with their relationship that okay, this is nice, but okay, now we've got to get back to reality. And I think that nobody says that in the episode, but it is kind of there. What's your flavour? And
I also you were saying at the start of the episode about how it starts with sci-fi pop music. I remember
in the bar, you mean?
Yeah, and I remember thinking this the first time I watched it as well. I thought that it was about to go into "Set Me Free, Why Don't You?"
No, same here.
Yeah,
it's a really similar melody, isn't it? The woman singing,
and because she sings "Set Me Free," which I mean is a bit like a
because he goes to us because it's like about, "Set me free, set me free." He goes,
yeah, but I mean it's kind of a bit prophetic because she is a slave and there is that element. So
she just keeps him hanging on. We get Jakar's new attaché arrives as well. So it's interesting because you've got the kind of dichotomy and the similarities and the differences between Londo and Jakar, but you've also got the two sort of underlings as well, and
well, they're having very similar experiences with their attachés. You've got Veer, Moonface, the Saturn of Joy.
Assassin.
And, the karate chopping.
Did you notice that the guy who comes onto her at the beginning, who she slaps down, is the same guy at the end of the episode that the guy zaps?
He's having a really bad day.
No, but he brings it on himself because in both instances he's getting in people's face. And it's just like, I hope he's learnt a lesson. Like the next day, he's just kind of, sorry, when he's walking around. It's just, I mean, it was probably just the fact that he was the only extra on set that day. He could string a sentence together. But that guy, he's just having a really bad day. and you get one of the great sort of moments where you get a sense of who Londo is as well is when he refers to himself as a washed-up old Republican dreaming of better days. You know,
Yeah.
that really is almost a kind of character biography of him.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a synopsis of who he is.
Yeah.
It'd be his Facebook profile.
Yeah, yeah. And Veers would be Moon-faced assassin in joy, which is, that's a line that I use all the time,
Yeah.
And I like the fact that later as well, when he's got the hangover and the bell's going, he's like, assassins, villains, just this type of language that there's a kind of weird, almost old-timiness.
And you also got the use of capital from this one.
No, I got the use of capital from Mr. Burns in The Simpsons.
Capital bangers.
Capital knockers.
Capital knockers.
Yeah. But it might even have preceded that. I think I just like the word capital. Like,
well, you do say it quite a lot.
I think it might have been. Was it Singing in the Rain? I think because I used to watch musicals with my gran when I was. How I am not a homosexual, I honestly just don't know. But I used to watch musicals with my gran when I was a kid, and I think that was the use of the word capital was quite common in in Gene Kelly sort of era films as well.
I think you kind of fancy yourself dancing along a footpath, swinging on a lamp pole.
A lamppost, you mean? Engaging in some hand fighting.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that is exactly what I meant. Thank you. That was really helpful. So the other thing as well that makes this feel a lot like a Star Trek episode is that there's very much an A plot and a B plot. You've got all the stuff with the purple files and the kind of connected bits of business about the Narn and Centauri talks, but then you've got the B plot about the security breach, with the communications anomaly, and that's a very Star Trek thing to have those two plots, and that's something actually, in fairness, that you don't really see a lot in Babylon 5. Like, you'll have multiple storylines going, but it's quite rare, certainly as the show goes on, to have that main storyline and B storyline thing. Usually,
the difference with Star Trek is that generally, if you have that A and B plot in Star Trek, they converge to help each other out by the end.
Not always, but they can.
Well, a lot of the time they do.
Yeah.
Whereas in this episode, they're just two things that are running parallel to each other.
Because funnily enough, the TV show that kind of revolutionised the idea of the A and the B plot was Seinfeld. Because what Seinfeld did, which now we take for granted, but was considered mind-blowing at the time, was that you'd have an A and a B plot, and they would often collide at the end of the episode.
Marine biologist.
Yeah. And that was revolutionary at the time. But now, of course, that's just how TV works.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I never watched Seinfeld at the time. And I went back to it many, many years after it had finished, and I watched it on DVD. And the DVDs have got loads of great extras. And they talk about that on the DVD, the fact that when they did it, the network were like, you can't do that. That's not how TV works. And Larry David didn't have any experience in TV. And he was like, well, why?
Why not?
And they were like, well, you can't. And he was like, well, why? Like, there was other things they did as well. Like, and kind of, again, Babylon 5 similar in some ways, and was contemporaneous with Seinfeld, actually, is there was an episode where Jerry had a girlfriend and all this stuff happened. And then in the next episode, he goes to see his girlfriend. And it's the same girlfriend. And then we're like, you can't do that. And they're like, why? And they're like, well, you don't bring back supporting people week after week. And Larry's like, well, but we haven't explained
where they've gone.
Where they've gone. And they're like, well, it's TV. You don't have to do that. And Larry David was like, well, why? Won't people wonder where? And he's like, no, they've been programmed by television not to think like that. And he's like, well, we like the actress. She was good. Why don't we just have her being the girlfriend of the next episode, and the audience will just assume he's still going out with her? And that was seen as being really like a crazy thing. And there was no reason for them not to do it, apart from that's the way it is.
Yeah.
It's just one of these weird...
It's just the way it is.
It's a very musical episode. Or was it the what's it called?
Just wait until we start covering Farscape.
Oh my God, no!
I've been singing the theme tune.
Yeah. Don't ask. I love the way that Londo pinches Veer's face when he's feeling in a good mood, because he's awful to him, but he's also really kind of cutely affectionate with him as well. It's just it's a really nice sort of trait. What we learned, I think, the big takeaway about Centauri culture that we get here is how power is ultimately acquired through acquisition of dirt on people. The idea that everybody's just got...
It's very Roman.
Yeah, it is. It's like basically you accumulate, and it's almost not seen as a bad thing. It's almost like the accumulation of wealth or land. It's just in this culture, it's how much shit you've got on people.
Manipulation.
Yeah, exactly. So Londo's...
It is very political in who you align with and who you are seen to be supporting or not supporting, and
So Londo's purple files are basically his accumulated power base. And what we see here, and it's a pretty tight, clever storyline in the way that the idea is that you could theoretically destabilize the whole of the Centauri Prime, because I think the idea is that you don't necessarily use this information, but just people knowing you've got it. In the same way that it's like the nuclear deterrence. You know, you have nuclear weapons, not so you can use them, but just so everybody's even and nobody will use them. And that's the kind of the thinking here. So for somebody to actually get it and to just randomly release them would just be... And also, you know, we know that the Centauri are at a very precarious point in their history, and that they just don't have the infrastructure or the sort of societal health to be able to weather something like that happening, you know?
Yeah, it would literally bring a government down.
Yeah, exactly. And also, you know, you talk about the imbalance. There's the idea that there's people in their culture who can be owned as well. So
it's a bit like finding out someone's having an affair and blackmailing them with it, but just on a much larger scale.
Yeah, but also on a... that whole thing has been normalized as part of their society.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if aliens came to Earth and they weren't capitalist, they would be like, think that the way that we base society on money, you'd probably think that was awful and completely... It's like, what? So there's just these bits of paper, and whoever has got the most of them has power, and the people who have less of them have hard lives. You'd be like, what the hell, dude? You know, but we just accept it because that's our values, and that's what we've sort of come up on. And it's no better or worse than the idea of extortion. It's just a question of whether it's acceptable, you know, in the context of your society. So Londo gives her a gift, and he wants to step out with her. And this is, I think, a really telling thing when he says, to hell with appearances, the idea that it's a little bit like Richard Gere walking into the hotel with the prostitute in Pretty Woman. You know, this kind of like, no, let's keep our head high. And that shows a sense of, not innocence, because he is a cynical person, but but there's still a light on inside him somewhere.
There is some genuine warmth and caring towards her.
Yeah.
From him.
You know, that he's willing to sacrifice face, which ultimately is what his entire culture is based on, is really kind of putting his money where his mouth is as well. So we get all this business with Trackus, the villain, as he puts him. And I like the fact that Londo goes to Sinclair about it, and he's completely transparent. He's like, yeah, I've been an idiot. He's like, I've been really naive. He's like, but I need your help. You know, Jeff, man, I need you.
But I think that's why Sinclair takes it seriously, because he has gone...
He understands.
Like, it's just not good. At this point, I just loved that Veer has lent his Centauri Nintendo
Oh,
to Jakar.
Yeah, and they're having a go.
Yeah, and it just reminded me of you watching the kids play Fortnite and desperately trying not to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Because they're just like burr, 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 punching away at it, and he's like
stressing out.
Yeah,
Watching. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And it's interesting as well how Sinclair's really good as well, because he sees an opportunity to leverage Londo's vulnerability.
He's no fool.
He's like, I'll help you, but you've got to
do
sort
something
this out
for me.
You know,
and I guess he's come to realise that Londo's not going to get offended by Sinclair behaving in that way.
No,
like that sort of probably adds respect for Sinclair from Londo.
Yeah.
Which in turn means Londo's more likely to fall in line with whatever Sinclair's wanting. So, you know, he's using his own power system to get what he needs.
Well, that's what negotiation is. Another thing is, I really like some of the alien character design in this episode, like that kind of gangster alien who almost looks like something out of a Scorsese movie. You know, with the slick back hair and in pursuit. He's kind of like what you'd see in Buffy a little bit later. You know, in Buffy you'd see like demons, but they'd be wearing like, you know, almost like swinger zoot suits and that kind of thing.
I wondered if it was the actor who played one of the rappers from Sister Act 2. You know, joyful, Lord.
Yeah. And you've got the guy as well, the sort of brutish looking one. In the scene as well. I just think there's some alien design in this that's really different to what you'd see in Star Trek, which was kind of, it wasn't just the kind of bumpy forehead kind of alien thing.
No, there was like, one of the characters had like, their mouth was kind of melting out of their face.
Yeah.
That was kind
of... It's kind of crazy designs. I always love it, and this is a weird thing. This must be just something that Michael O'Hare likes doing. When Sinclair gets to play a character.
Oh, yeah.
Like when he's like ha 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 ha, like when he's laughing, and just being like pretending he's a bad guy, just being a bit crazed. Again, it's like Sinclair. No, it's like Cisco. It's full on. It's just, I love it when actors just go for it.
Yeah,
you know, and you can do that in sci-fi sometimes as well.
I kind of feel like his crazy persona is him sort of breaking out into, you know, his real life kind of amazing.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's all the stress of being in a dangerous place. I also like how one of the toughs has got great 90s sci-fi sunglasses.
Oh,
well.
Yeah.
It's a powerful look, that is.
It's very sort of glaucoma, sci-fi glaucoma.
Yeah. Also, you get a little bit more flavour around Psychor as well, like the fact that she's not allowed to, that Talia's not allowed to, there's rules. She's scared. She's scared to sort of do a probe.
She's not allowed to probe deeply.
Yeah, so she has to.
A surface thought.
Yeah, so she has to just do a bit of trickery to make it rise out to the surface. And
she does sort of a don't think about blinking thing.
Yeah, exactly. She just psychs him out. And so we
thinking about blinking.
We get some closure to the Ivanova. Like we see her dad dies, and we learn that it was her that was using this. And Garibaldi kind of lets her off the hook, but sort of suggests don't go again. And I like the fact as well that she still stays emotionally closed. Like when he says, "Do you want to get a drink?" and she's just like, "I'm on duty." But the softens a little bit, but still, it doesn't drop into sentimentality.
No, but it's kind of. It's the beginning of their friendship. Yeah, which is nice.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, it is, because I mean, she's new to the station, so it is a very early.
Well, it's that point of, I know you've done something that's against the rules, but I know why you've done it. Thank you for not rating me out.
Well, they're showing each other the type of people that they are.
Exactly.
It's
nice.
And we finish up with Londo saying goodbye to Adira. So any final thoughts, Hannah, before we finish up the non-spoiler section?
No, just thought it was a good standalone. Happy to have watched it, happy to have rewatched it, and looking forward to the next one, of which I will tell you in 1 minuto. Right, the next episode we will be watching is called Infection. The synopsis says, a living weapon wreaks havoc on the station. It is directed by Richard Compton and written by JMS.
Alrighty, okay, we'll look forward to that. So, unless you are joining us for the spoiler section, we will see you again very soon. Quick reminder that we appreciate feedback at rewatchprojectpodcast@gmail.com, or alternatively, you can just leave comments here on this channel. Check out our friend shows, donations welcome, and also please give us positive reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But we will be back in just a moment with some spoiler talk.
See you later.
And we are back. So the things I just wanted to mention were Adira does come back later in the show and is murdered.
Yes.
And that the ramifications of that are quite sizable in the show. So I think that's really a really good thing. The other spoiler thing I guess I just wanted to mention was I think that by having this opportunity to show an idealistic Londo and a Londo that wants to do the right thing and wants to rekindle his innocence, really, and there's other instances of this in the early run of the show, really makes his turn even more tragic.
Yeah. Yeah, because you know that there's, for want of a better word, humanity in him.
Yeah, it is just indoctrination and circumstance.
It is indoctrination, a sense of purpose, fulfilling a Centauri ambition.
A code of conduct almost.
Yeah, it's kind of, he knows that it's an obligation. He knows that he has to be these things. And unfortunately, he can't be emotional. Yeah. He has to
and the things, think
of it differently.
Part of him wants it as well. Part of him does want the power, you know. And that's
his ego, isn't it?
What he says in the pilot, this is my flaw. You know, he knows that. And he seems, but there is an element of people do use that as an excuse. You know, people will be like, oh, it's just what I'm like.
Don't be like that.
Don't be like that, you know. And I know it's cheer up, stupid, or you know, smoke yourself thin. It's one of those kind of just things. But yeah. So I think that this is a standalone, but at the same time, I do really see the additions to the tapestry of the show that you get from this episode. Particularly now I've watched it a few times, I'm like, yeah, this moment later really lands more because of this.
I think Adira coming back is so great in the sense that, you know, he says, go and do your thing, come back to me. And you kind of think, you know, oh, I hope she's not just getting on the train and being like, dodged a bullet on that one.
And also, it's a TV convention.
Old man again.
It's a TV convention as well, where when the girl of the week goes, it's like, maybe we'll see each other again sometime. And part of you's thinking, nah, it's a TV show, you won't.
Yeah.
So the fact that you do, again, is another one of those kind of points of difference elements. Again, like the Seinfeld thing, the fact that Jerry's got the same girlfriend next week. It's one of those. But okay, well, that's us for now. We'll be back very soon to talk about the next episode of Babylon 5. So thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.
Take care.